Good morning and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jack Franchuli for Wahoo's 24/7. Today's podcast, we're going to focus on UVA basketball since they're tipping off on Monday night. We're doing our football broadcast on Tuesday. Tony Elliott would actually speak to the media on Monday because of the shortened week that they're going to Louisville on Thursday. This is our first episode since prior to that Miami game. And last week we had an unexpected break. If you read on my message board post, we had a little bit of a hectic week with illness in the family, plus just a crazy week with basketball and football kind of going simultaneously with media days, and then also still not having someone to help with the editing part of the podcast. That's hopefully getting sorted out so that I could have some help on that side when I'm on the road, especially with basketball and football kind of going the same time. Next week, I'll be at both men's and women's game and football. So it's going to be a little bit of a hectic week, me being constantly not being home. So it's hard for me to edit. So hopefully that will get sorted itself out, which means more podcast episodes like it was previously with twice a week rather than once a week. And then obviously the unexpected hiatus last week. So like I said, we're going to focus a little bit on Virginia men's basketball. They start off on Tuesday night, and there's been a lot to talk about. And Virginia head coach Tony Bennett met with the media, not only in ACC tip-off when we were in Charlotte, but also last Monday for media day. And he seems very excited about this team. He's excited to experiment with this lineup and seeing what lineup works with what. He's really excited to see his transfers and how these new faces kind of line up. About Reese Beekman finally being the guy. This is his team without Kihei Clark. So one of the big things that he focused on a lot is talking about this lineup and how they can adjust moving forward and how they can adjust who's starting with who they're playing.
I think, first you better rely on Reese. That's important because of he's in his fourth year, and then Ryan, who played last year as a freshman, 11 minutes, and Isaac McNeely played the 20 minutes as a freshman. Those guys will have to certainly, even though they didn't play much, we'll rely on them. And there's a newness that's exciting now, but there's going to be growing pains, and you're going to have to be patient. But I think we've done a good job putting this team together, and I like this team because the core of our team, if it goes right, we'll stay together for the next 2 or 3 years, and that's important. And who knows? I know it's a different time, but you still have that. So we've been successful because of continuity, and I think continuity and veterans will always win out, even in this new era. So that's the challenge. But I think there's some excitement, and again, that team last year was old and good, and then unfortunately with Ben getting hurt at the end, that was hard for us. But now we got a team that I hope is new and good. We got to try to figure that out, but patience is required. That's why these scrimmages are so valuable. We scrimmaged UConn and learning a lot about that. A lot of guys, they do have experience. Andrew Rohde was a really good freshman at St. Thomas. Jake Rose, Jordan Minor, Dante Harris, those guys played in college games. One in the Big 12, one in the Big East. So there's some experience, but yeah, it's just getting together and playing, and then relying on some of the other guys. It's a process, and again, I don't know where they pick us. None of that stuff really matters because it's going to be what you do, not what anyone says or you say. So we'll have to prove it, and it's kind of like, it's a little bit of a reset for us, but trying to build it with, I think there's some excitement. We've looked good at times, and we've looked bad at times, and that's the reality of it.
We'll play host to Tarleton State to open things up on Monday night. It is set to tip off at 7 p.m. on ACC Network Extra. So prepare us for the opening game. We're going to take a quick break and welcome 24/7 Sports Isaac Trotter. Isaac is going to help me talk a little bit about the key talking points heading into the season for the Cavaliers. So we'll be right back with Isaac. And welcome back to the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jack Frenchly for Wahoo's 24/7. And we're going to bring in Isaac here in just a minute to talk about UVA hoops and kind of preview the expectations for the season coming in as an unranked team in preseason polls. It's a season where the Cavaliers return 28.1% of the scoring. That's compared to them returning 91.4% from the 2021-2022 year. They only have one starter returning, which is Reese Beekman. And there's a couple of faces that return that had around 11 minutes, which is Reese Beekman and Isaac McNeely. But a lot of new faces coming in on the transfer route. And also, if you include Leon Bond, who redshirted last year, he's also someone who will be competing for minutes, and freshman Blake Buchanan. And so Virginia Hoops is going to start their season on a Monday night. And to help me go deeper into this season and preview, I have 24/7 Sports Isaac Trotter. Isaac, thank you so much for joining us.
Anytime. Basketball season is here. It's the best time of the year, and I'm excited. So let's talk some basketball.
Yeah, and for the first time, I think since 2017, 2018, Virginia men's basketball is not ranked in the AP 25 poll. I think Tony Bennett's teams have been ranked 9 out of 10 seasons. So a surprise for you when you look at this Virginia team that they coming in unranked, or because of so many new faces, it's logical that that's what's happening preseason?
Yeah, I'm actually not super surprised because this is a team that doesn't look like a Tony Bennett team, right? Like this is a very young team this year. Last year, Virginia was one of the oldest teams in the country. This year, I think Virginia is about the 11th youngest in the ACC. So it's just a very different looking group. You got transfers coming in, Tony Bennett adding a bunch of new faces. So, I think the AP top 25 is really flawed, right? Like you go back last year, UConn's not ranked. Texas Tech was number 25 in the country last year, and they finished dead last in the Big 12. Obviously, North Carolina, number 1, doesn't make the NCAA tournament. So the AP top 25 is a flawed exercise, but it's not super stunning. I think right now, a lot of people are having a hard time with Virginia nationally. Like, hey, like they've lost a lot of guys. Like, hey, Caden Shedrick is a person that a lot of people from the outside really liked, a top 15-ish transfer in the country. He's gone. Kihei Clark is gone. They've lost a lot of guys that we've seen. And, I think if there's a consistent theme with the AP top 25 is like the teams that return the players that we know what they look like, yeah, we'll rank them high. The teams that don't return the players that we know what they look like in that scheme, then we're not going to like them as much. And I disagree with a lot of certain things with the AP top 25, but I understand it with Virginia, so to speak.
Yeah, there's a lot of new faces. I mean, this was pretty much a redo of Virginia's roster. Tony Bennett went to the portal and worked the portal ridiculously hard to get Jake Groves, Jordan Minor. Dante Harris was the one he picked up even before the season ended last year from Georgetown. Jordan Minor, Andrew Rohde. I mean, though he went into the portal and saw the holes that he needed to fill. But I think the returners are some very talented guys. Like obviously keeping Reese Beekman for his final year of eligibility was one of the biggest recruiting wins that Tony Bennett and his staff had since Reese Beekman was going into the NBA draft and kind of seeing where he stood there. But also Ryan Dunn is also a very talented guy that's getting a lot of buzz coming to this season. So a lot of the returners have, a lot of potential to have breakout season. And Reese Beekman, there's no Kihei Clark. So this is his chance to make it his team.
It totally is. And I thought that I was at the NBA Combine, and I thought Reese played really well. And I was talking to him there, and he kind of gave the vibe that he didn't want to go back to school. It felt like he was really focused on that process. And so to get him back, I think was a pretty coordinated effort from Virginia from, all aspects of it. Like, obviously there's going to be some NIL stuff there, but it's also from a pure basketball perspective. Like what you're coming back to show is that this is your team now. Like this is my show. And so I think offensively, you've kind of been waiting for Reese Beekman to assert himself as that alpha. I have no questions about him defensively, but at the Combine, you saw him get to play with the ball in his hands more. You saw him be the key decision maker, and he was making guys better. And I think that's going to really translate to Virginia. What does that look like from a stats perspective? I expect him to have a career year offensively, but I do think it's a situation where like he makes everybody else so much better. Like I think he opens up those catch and shoot opportunities for Isaac McNeely. He opens up Ryan Dunn as a screener, as a roller. Like you're going to see Andrew Rohde's, transition from the Summit League to the ACC, which is really, really hard, be so much easier because Reese Beekman is back. And so I think it's a very fascinating, he's as important as any player in the ACC, in my opinion. Like he's really the piece that holds this entire group together, and he sets the standard, on in the practice floor, on the defensive end, everything. Like he is the standard setter, the tone setter for this team. And so to get him back, you could look in the portal and potentially get a big time transfer. But like you could argue that like there's only a couple players that are more valuable to Virginia in the portal than what they would have gotten if Reese Beekman didn't come back. You know what I mean? Like him coming back is as important as, any of the top 5 transfers in the country, I think, and that's a huge, huge piece that's kind of slept under the radar. Like everybody goes, oh, Reese Beekman back. That's awesome. But like, what would this program look like without him? Like we would have a very different conversation about Virginia's floor and their ceiling if he wasn't here.
No, that's for sure. And I think in this age of transfer portal, sometimes your biggest win in recruiting is when you recruit that locker room with your best talent. So that was definitely, I agree with you. That was the best win for this team during the off season. And I feel like it's time to overreact a little bit, Isaac, because during, obviously they open up the season on Monday night and they released the game notes coming into it, which means they have a potential starting lineup. So this is time for all our overreactions on what the media relations team at UVA has predicted as a potential starting lineup. You have the Reese Beekman, Andrew Rohde, Isaac McNeely, and Ryan Dunn, which is we all expected those 4 to be in the starting lineup. But then Jake Groves is their 5th guy on that starting lineup, which, many people did not have him in their potential starting lineups. They had him as a potential part of the lineup because Tony Bennett even said that he's going to tweak a little bit the lineup depending on the matchups. But having Jordan Minor, Tate Murray, Leon Bond, Blake Buchanan, and Dante Harris coming from the bench, I thought Jordan Minor was going to be that 5th guy. What is your reaction when you see that?
Yeah, I think it will be Jordan Minor eventually, and what does that look like now? It's kind of up and down. I think that eventually both of these guys are going to be needed all year long. What does this split look like? Like how often are we going to see Jordan Minor and Jacob Groves on the floor together? I don't know. I think that's a question that's still kind of up in the air. Or is it really like a 50-50 split at the 5? But, both guys can be helpful. I think you need both of them to really compete. And Groves is a guy who I think he shot 38% on threes last year. A very efficient catch and shoot guy, but he's not going to shoot a ton of volume there. But Virginia doesn't really ask that from its big men. It's, do you defend? Do you rebound? Do you turn people's water off in the paint? Like, what do you add from a screening perspective? Can you get guys open? And Groves, I think defensively, is really well coached throughout his career. He transferred to Oklahoma last year. Porter Moser, they didn't have a great year the last couple of years, but Moser, like you talk to coaches around the industry, like he's regarded as one of the best defensive coaches and pure basketball minds in the country. And Groves was really well schooled for them, did a lot of very good things for them defensively. So I think it's one of those situations where maybe that transition from the Big 12 to the ACC might be a touch easier. If he really is starting, I don't think that he's going to be, concerned by the length or athleticism of high major basketball. Jordan Minor's a really good player. Jordan Minor's going to help them a lot this year. But I think Groves, that transition period for Groves might be a touch easier because Merrimack to Virginia is definitely a difference. But I do think that Minor's going to end up, maybe if this is a real competition for that 5 spot, I think he's going to end up winning it by the time ACC play comes around because, he's 6'8", he's 240, he's strong, he's a really, really impactful defender. He gets his hands on a lot of basketballs, like just deflections machine. And I think he's going to rebound really, really well. I think rebounding is obviously athleticism and length and speed is different from Merrimack to Virginia, but rebounding is all about toughness and do you want it? And Jordan Minor, there is no question about his toughness and if he wants the basketball. And I just feel like he has a nose for the ball, and that's going to really, really showcase on the glass. And he's going to be a really helpful piece. So they need both. I don't think either of these guys is a piece that's going to come in and be like you're 15 and 11. But I think together they could combine 15 and 11. I don't know what that minutes looks like. I'm fascinated to find out what that looks like on Monday and moving forward.
Yeah, I'm actually really fascinated to find out Blake Buchanan's role too, because I feel like he's a guy that's come in, although a freshman, and freshmen don't generally contribute much in Tony Bennett's system, although we have, obviously Isaac McNeely and Ryan Dunn, who did contribute about 10, 11 minutes last year. I feel like Blake Buchanan is one that could also fight his way also to potential starter in particular matchups. What's kind of your take on Blake and what is your expectations around him?
Yeah, I'm very fascinated as you are. Like, I think there is a question about how well Virginia can protect the rim this year. They've lost a lot of size. Caden Shedrick was a big piece of that. I mean, we've seen it in the past where like Virginia, like this front court is pretty small compared to like some of the ACC counterparts. How much can Buchanan fix that? What does he add there from that? Like, he was one of the better rim protectors in his class. So I'm just interested to see like how good he can be on that end right away. Like rim protection is something that I feel like if he can run the floor, protect the rim, rebound, and just understand the scheme, I think there are minutes here. But I think it also goes back to like how often can you get like you're splitting those 80 front court minutes up between Dunn. I expect him to get 30. How much more there? Like 25 for Minor, 25 for Groves, and somehow, that's 80 right there. So like he has to steal those minutes from somewhere. Like where does that come from? That's my concern about how big his role can be right now. But from a rim protection standpoint, like, Minor's a good athlete, but he's not 6'11". You know what I mean? Like Groves is a solid athlete, but he doesn't have that pure, real, like raw verticality. And I think Buchanan averaged over 3 blocks a game in his on the grassroots circuit. I think I should double check that number, but I think he can be a really interesting piece of that because he just looks a little bit different than what Virginia has in that front court.
Yeah, and then I think when you look at breakout candidates for a season, it's easy to point to Ryan Dunn when you think breakout candidate. I mean, a lot of people point to him as a potential NBA guy even after this season. When you look at this roster, who's your breakout candidate? Who's the guy that you think, okay, he's going to make more noise than expected, or just a guy that feels like he could stand out?
Yeah, I'm a huge Andrew Rohde fan. I think Andrew Rohde rocks. There's a lot about his game that's so fun. And, I think that the Summit League to the ACC is scary. I'm fully aboard that. But like, he's 6'6", he's super long. The IQ is there. He moves without the basketball super well. His release is just like lightning quick. And he's got he is an assassin from downtown. So I think he's going to be a huge piece of this. Dunn's going to be a really important piece. I thought McNeely, like he was a freshman last year. It didn't feel like he played like one, like he just was super, super sound and finding a way to get on the floor. And that backcourt was old. That whole team was old. And it felt like Virginia was better when Isaac McNeely was on the floor last year. And I don't think that's going to change. So I think that these sophomores, it's so fascinating to me because these sophomores really control everything about Virginia. I know Virginia is going to be good as long as Reese Beekman is healthy and Tony Bennett's the coach. Like they're going to be solid, a high floor team. But can they win the ACC? They can't without these 3 sophomores. And it's Rohde and it's McNeely and it's Dunn. And how does that work? For me, like Dunn is defensively. If he's your defensive stopper this year, he elevates into that, and he's the best wing defender in the ACC. I think that's realistic for him. That's a realistic goal that he should try to be going out and doing every single night. But offensively, I think he would be better if he simplified his game. And I think that's where Virginia can use him in such great ways because they don't need him to be that alpha. They don't need him to be that shot creation. Like, hey, clock is winding down against Duke. It's 6 seconds on the shot clock. Here you go. Take it and dribble twice and pull up for a 17-foot jumper. Like they don't need that from him. And so I'm really interested to see what he turns into and how he can find his offensive game organically without necessarily needing to go create something out of nothing. And how does he, how efficient is he from his catch and shoot numbers? How efficient is he in transition? And what does his job look like in the half court? Can they use him as a screener? Can they show some of his secondary playmaking and put him in positions to succeed where he is attacking long closeouts and going to the rim and tearing the rim off? Because that's the type of athlete that he is. And I'm so excited to see what he looks like. And we've seen a lot of sophomore leaps. The easy ones are you see the Jaden Ivies, you see the Keegan Murrays, you see Johnny Davis, what they turned into, just huge sophomore leagues into first round picks. I don't think he has the role to be that type of offensively that have that offensive role for Virginia, but I think he can elevate himself into a first round pick by just simplifying his game offensively and then being, a defensive maven that he is.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it. For my final question was in the first question we asked about the preseason rankings and what you thought. When you look at this team, and you said it, if Tony Bennett's the coach and Reese Beekman is healthy, this team can have a higher ceiling. Where do you think this team will be when conference play starts? Do you feel like they're going to exceed expectations?
Yeah, so that's a fascinating question because I felt like last year Virginia started out really not many hiccups. They looked great early in the season. You know, what they did out in Vegas. They beat some really good teams and looked like the best team out there. And so I think last year's team obviously had more experience, but I don't think it had as much skill. And this year's team is a little different. They don't have that much experience, but they got a lot more skill. And, you know, we haven't really talked about him yet, but Dante Harris has a lot of skill. And I think he's going to bring a lot of, is he that second unit offensive leader for this group? And so I would expect there to be some hiccups early. It's natural. You got a lot of new faces. You have a ton of underclassmen. Like, there's going to be some defensive breakdowns that are going to probably drive Tony Bennett crazy. And he is probably not going to love some of the shot selection from some young guys. And that's going to happen. But I do think that, like, you can see the vision where Virginia, I mean, this is an ACC middle that's completely wide open. And so we have Duke number one in our ACC preseason. And I think that's fair. But you look at 2 on, like, does anybody feel that great about UNC? No. Does anybody feel that great about Clemson? You know, they're really good offensively. They have major defensive questions. And, you know, Brad Brownell is still coaching for his job. Like, Miami, I like their top 4. They have major depth questions. So, like, you can talk yourself in and out of a ton of these teams that are projected 2, 3, 4 in the ACC. That's where I think Virginia, like, maybe November and December look a little bit rocky, but these sophomores are going to start playing like juniors and seniors really soon. Like, that's just how it is. And this is a developmental program. Like, I expect Ryan Dunn to be ahead of the curve. I expect Isaac McNeely to be ahead of the curve. I expect Dante Harris to be a little bit better than a lot of people expect because he's been there. Like, I feel like that just being in that system is so important. And so, you know, I think for me, like, I don't know if Virginia has the ceiling to win the league. Maybe they do if some of these young guys can really come together. But I think that you could put them at 2 and feel really good about that in the ACC. Like, I think they have a high floor, maybe as high a floor as almost any team in the ACC outside of Duke. And then their ceiling is, like, if you're second, if you're competing for an ACC crown in the middle of February with this young of a roster, I think that's all you can ask for, right? Like, that's what you can ask for. And, you know, maybe we'll look back and be like, wait, how was Virginia not ranked top 25? If Dunn takes a leap, if McNeely takes a leap, you know, if Rhodey, you know, makes the Summit League to ACC jump look pretty minor because he's a really talented player. And there's some NBA buzz with him too. And I think he's a guy that can really sneak up on teams because he's a lot bigger. He's a lot more skilled than a lot of people expect. And that's a huge, huge recruiting win for him. And, you know, right now I'm working on a story where hopefully we can get it on how he slipped through the cracks. And he's got to prove it. And he's got all of these things to do. But, like, there's a lot of measurables here that go, how did they miss on him? Like, how did high majors not get him on campus? And I think it's going to look really big for Virginia, not only for this year, but also for next year, if they can keep him around for a couple of years, because I think he's going to be a really good player. He just might need a little bit of time.
I was going to say, you know, we're talking about what expectations are for this team, but this team, most of these guys are expected to be back the final year. Obviously, some of them might want to evaluate their NBA draft stock, but Jordan Minor is the only one with only 1 year left of eligibility when it comes to the transfers. All the other guys have multiple years of eligibility. So this is definitely a team that Tony Bennett created in mind for consistency for the next year. And you mentioned Dante Harris, and actually Tony Bennett made a point to mention him in ACC tip-off during Charlotte, saying he was one of the best on-ball defenders that he's coached. And even Reese Beekman said the same thing. Reese Beekman saying it's been good to face off against Dante because he's been getting better facing up against a guy like that as well. So it'll be interesting if sometimes you might even see both of them on the court, because I know Tony Bennett said he's going to experiment a little bit with his lineup. So it's going to be an interesting season for you.
It will be. And, you know, the Dante Harris and Reese Beekman together, I think that's a very fun combo. Because, like, all right, let's play this game. All right, you're playing Duke. Duke has a boatload of guards that can go get one. Tyrese Proctor's going to be a breakout candidate this year, but they got Jared McCain. They got Caleb Foster. They have Jeremy Roach. Like, they got a lot of guards you got to handle for. And so, like, you know, Rhodey still has to prove himself on the defensive end. I think that's still a real question. And McNeely, like, I thought he is a guy that I think he projects to be maybe a hook and trail person who can really defend shooters well. But I still have some questions about him as an on-ball defender, right? As he's growing into his role. I think it isn't crazy to be like, okay, like Dante Harris and Reese Beekman are the guys that you're matching up against Tyrese Proctor and Jeremy Roach, and let's go to war. And so, like, that's where the chess like the chess pieces for this group gets really interesting because I think they have like the bones to be very good defensively. They're just young. Like if you have like a point of attack defenders like Beekman and Harris, and then you have the wing rangy defenders like Ryan Dunn who can really be good, and then hopefully your backside defense continues to just be stout enough, even if you don't have that true vertical rim protector, unless Blake Buchanan pops. Like there's still like a piece of this defense that it can be like, I don't think anybody expect this to be, Tony Bennett's best defensive team, but this is still going to be a good defensive team. Like I just have no doubts about that in my mind.
Yeah, this is. I'm interested to see what Tony Bennett is going to do with this lineup coming into the season. I think it's going to be a lot of tinkering depending on the lineup. It's just going to be fun to see what this team will look like. Well, Isaac, thank you so much for joining us today. Talk a little bit about UVA hoops.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.